All right. Well, welcome to the 8th training. It's crazy that we're already at number 8, and this is essentially kind of it is our last one of 2025. We will have one kind of final wrap-up call in May of 2026, which is crazy, but we're not going to all be together until May of 2026. So really want to take this time to celebrate like all the work that you guys have done and put into all of this through all the phases. We're going to kind of reflect on that and then just talk about really the final steps of launching your project in your new strategy. I know most of you have already kind of started that, but just talking about some additional things that you can think about. Renata, I saw that it's making you get access. Let me accept that. So odd. I'm going to share a version that's not forced copy and see if that helps. You'll still have to make a copy yourself because you're only going to have viewer access. But hopefully that maybe fixes the issue. All right. So as I kind of provided an overview, the sections today we're focusing on our change management and communication, specifically thinking about like how to ensure that you're informing everyone, all the different stakeholder groups of the whole process to date so that they know why this implementation plan came about, how it came about, and then we're going to talk specifically about project launch. So it's nothing new being added to your plates, just really focusing on finalizing that plan, as well as thinking about how you're going to be rolling out and communicating this to the broader school community. So our objectives for today are that at the end of this session, you will learn strategies to communicate and launch your implementation plan effectively. We'll reinforce the performance management routines for ongoing success. And then we'll have you leave with a concrete project launch and communication plan. You already created that communication plan in your implementation plan. A lot of nuanced of plan talk, but that's your tab 5. We're just going to review it and make sure that we've specifically thought about the project launch piece, making sure that everyone's aware of the why behind the work that you all did. Also, before we jump in, want to get kind of a feel from everyone. Either come off mute or you can share in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 5, how ready do you feel for your project launch?
Okay, I think Temple's a 5.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And 5 being good.
And I think we're a 5 as well.
Awesome. I was kind of hoping that's what we would hear. So again, a lot of the discussions that we'll be having today is just to make sure that there's not any gaps. Anything that maybe Temple thought of that Lytle didn't, or Lytle thought of that Temple didn't. Just do some pure like shared learning of, hey, we're thinking about communicating this way to this group. So just want to make sure we have everything covered. So jumping in to section 1, this is where we're kind of talking about just the overall goal of change management and just communication. So again, looking back at our whole process and just reiterating that it is a cycle. It's not something that there's an end point. So this looks a little bit different from the previous process diagrams we've been sharing. We worked with Deborah to kind of evolve this because we really wanted to show that it's a cycle and it's continuous. It's not something where there's a distinct start and end point. So during phase 1, that's when we went through and assessed. You collect all that data, you synthesize the data, and you had that needs assessment, where you then moved into phase 2, where you did that root cause analysis and created your theory of action, really linking between what you learned in the needs assessment and where you wanted to be using that kind of best practices framework. Then with your theory of action, you went to link of like, this is what we want to do to get to that point. Phase 3 is what we're finishing up now, is that planning phase. So you already identified your strategy. You created a measurement plan and then made sure that you have a communication and stakeholder engagement plan of how you're going to continuously engage, thinking about how you're continuously collecting feedback on, is the plan being implemented with fidelity? Are you seeing the changes that you want to see? And then we're going to be moving into phase 4. Phase 4 is from January to beginning of May, end of April-ish. And that's when you're actually going to be implementing your changes, conducting your performance management routines, and then continuously repeating your assessment. So that's collecting new data to see where you've seen changes, where you haven't seen changes, being able to really monitor. And then knowing that once you are even in phase 4, you're going to move back to the assessment phase where you're going to say, okay, where are we at now? Have we seen the changes we wanted to see? When we created this theory of action, were we able to jump and get to where we wanted to be? If yes, what worked well, what didn't? If no, what changes do we need to make? And then it's just a constant continuous improvement cycle. So again, just thinking about it as you guys were given all of these tools and resources, and we want you to continue to use them. So all of the data collection tools, modify them to best fit your needs, but know that you, having collected this data this past spring, you have such a strong baseline data point that you can continue to implement that survey, those focus groups, and see those changes over time and look at that. And that's good for, obviously, for performance management to see what changes happen, but also to have that data. It'll support other, like looking into other LASSO grants. So you have this data in your back pocket to support the work you're doing. So when we think about phase 4 is a pretty light touch point. It's really going to be in terms of our supports. Really, the whole goal of phase 4 is beginning to implement. Again, I know that a lot of you, I think both districts have already begun to implement, but this is when it's like fully kicked off. So you'll be implementing your plan. You'll be having your regular performance management routine check-ins. And then with us, we'll just be meeting monthly with a lead coach or with the lead to have our coaching call. So during those coaching calls, and we've discussed this with both teams, it'll just be us meeting to say, how's everything going? How's the implementation plan? How's things going like process-wise? Are there any barriers or challenges that we can help troubleshoot? And then how is the data review process looking? Are we making sure that we're continuously looking at the data? There'll be pretty light touch points, but just knowing that it's kind of a gradual release process. We still want to be here so that we're your supports, but we're not going to be having these regular trainings or anything. Any questions about kind of this whole cycle, specifically thinking about phase 4? And again, you guys are the pre-pilot, emphasizing that if there's anything throughout this process, really even thinking about in phase 4, where you're like, this would be great if we could have these additional supports, or we don't need XYZ, please let us know. We're preparing for the pilot to kick off in January. So we really appreciate any and all feedback from you guys who have really been like the lead innovators in helping us pre-pilot this process. So thinking about the importance of kind of a change management process. Change management involves really managing the people side of change through these systematic procedures like communication, training, and supports to minimize any resistance and maximize the success of new processes or structures. So when done effectively, change management helps build buy-in. People understand the why behind the work. I know working, like when I worked in a school district, we constantly were having new strategies implemented, but we weren't always informed of the why behind it. So there wasn't that buy-in. Teachers were like, we just have something else coming in that we have to do, but their buy-in was not inherent because they didn't understand how it came about. This process is so unique because all these changes and recommendations came from the teachers themselves. So being able to reiterate of, hey, do you remember when you guys did all that work? You participated in the focus groups, you did teacher time diaries, you completed a staff survey. We collected all this feedback from you. We created this plan. based on what we heard from you, and this is why we're implementing it. So reminding them of this is everything we learned from you and is in response to what we learned from you. It also aligns roles and expectations. That's why the implementation plan is so detailed. We want everyone to be able to know what is expected of them, what role they play, and what their responsibilities are. That way, there's just no gaps. And then also that it supports performance management routines. A lot of times we'll have an amazing plan set, and it's kind of, you go with it maybe for a month and it's implemented really strongly, but then it kind of falls off the radar. So being able to set these regularly occurring meetings where you're looking at data will really make sure that the process is being implemented with fidelity, as well as you're reviewing data to make real-time changes. So rather than waiting until like at the end of the year and saying, okay, well, that didn't work, you have some touch points throughout the year to make some small tweaks to see what works, what doesn't. Some common pitfalls when change management is weak. There's time constraints because people are communicating kind of last minute. There's confusion about roles, maybe one person assuming someone is doing something when someone else is doing it. And then also competing priorities. Again, we know that you all are doing so much, and there's so much that are put on your plates, on teachers' plates. So when they don't have that buy-in and that clear understanding of the role that they play, it's going to fall off. So we really want to be clear around why this is important, how the work is happening, and what we expect to see. So this slide is just showing, again, work you've already done. So when we're thinking about who needs to know about the project, this is thinking about the key audiences that you previously identified on tab 5 in your implementation plan. And this is your communication plan. So you specifically identified who. So which key groups of stakeholders is this messaging supporting? Remember, thinking about it from all different lenses, from like the board of what level of information do they need to know, down to teachers, down to support staff, who all needs to know what changes are occurring and what ways you're messaging them. At the same time, when you're creating that kind of communication plan, it was inherent that we wanted you to think about barriers and resistance. So thinking about what you've experienced in the past, specifically in terms of communication and project rollouts or launches. What barriers have you experienced and how have you overcome them? Just in thinking about and preparing for that. Again, these are pieces that you've already covered. Just linking it specifically to our project launch that we'll talk about. So when we think about your project launch and what to communicate, we want to tell a concrete, simple, consistent story. So regardless of the stakeholder group that you're communicating to, we want to have the same story that you're telling. It's just going to look a little different. So for the board, it might just be like a higher level overview of this is the process. In the communications to teachers, you can specifically say, hey, remember when we did all of this work and you did this? This is where this recommendation came from, and this is why we're doing this work. So it's really, you have your full story. It's just certain segments are best served for specific stakeholder groups. But we really want the full story to include why. So the overall purpose and vision. Thinking back from when we first started this all together, you all had your reasoning for why you wanted to do the teacher time study project. And really it was looking at how to, I'm thinking back for both of you, I think it was identifying work that teachers were doing that was over and beyond and taking away from their time with students, providing direct instruction. So that's your why, your purpose and vision, what you wanted to see and learn. Your what, the strategies and priorities. So that's kind of talking about high level of this was a 4-phase process or 3-phase process. We're currently in phase 4. We collected the data, we interpreted it. I think emphasizing that the data was collected with teachers themselves, the teacher researcher leaders. It was analyzed as a cohesive group to identify where you want to be in comparison to where you are. You created an in-depth plan with continuous feedback from your teacher, researcher, leaders. And then also now going into phase 4. And then also talking about who and when. So the roles, timelines, and accountability. This is where it'll really vary by stakeholder group. But for some people, they're going to need a little bit more detail in comparison to others. So when you're thinking about like if it's a master schedule redesign, you're going to need to be like probably more like you'll let the board know, but then you'll have a more detailed timeline for teachers, for example. So thinking about kind of the variance in timeline as well as how descriptive it is. And then also sharing kind of the data piece of how you'll know whether you're successful. I think this is important because it shows that you're using data to drive your changes, but it also kind of inherently invites feedback. So we have these teacher researcher leaders who are on the ground be able to say like, hey, how is everything going? We're implementing this. What feedback are you hearing? And then being able to collect feedback from other teachers as well. When we're also thinking about the communication plan, it's important to think about the how as well, which was covered in this column. So deciding on the best channel for communication. So with the board, it would most likely be probably including like a brief presentation in one of your board meetings. With the teachers, maybe it is presenting it at like a beginning, well, not beginning of the year, like a PD or something where it's like an all staff meeting where you're able to present like an overview and then share where they can get additional information. Just thinking about the different channels, when we're thinking about project launch, there may be, and most likely will be, multiple different approaches for the same group. So maybe for teachers, you present it at like an all staff meeting where it's a verbal brief presentation, but then you also have follow-up emails of, hey, this is a reminder that this is why we're doing this work. Here's an overview of what we're doing, and X, Y, and Z will be occurring on this date. So just making sure that you're really thinking about how you are initiating that project launch discussion as well as maintaining it so it is top of mind. Thinking about a communication example. So this is kind of thinking about it specifically from the lens of a school board, breaking it down by the who, what, where, when, why. So why being the teacher time study revealed that teachers spend an average of only 38% of their week on direct instruction and planning. The goal of this implementation plan is to reclaim teacher time for high impact instruction in student learning. The what? We're implementing 3 district-wide strategies: streamlining administrative tasks through shared service models, revisiting meeting structures to protect instructional planning time, and piloting new scheduling tools in 5 schools this spring. The who and when. Principals will lead site-level rollout beginning in January, supported by district quality improvement teams. Progress reports will be shared at board meetings in February and May, with early feedback gathered from teachers after the first month. And then thinking about measures of success. We'll track the percentage of teacher time dedicated to instruction and planning, teacher satisfaction surveys, and school level implementation fidelity. Success will mean at least a 10% increase in instructional time by the end of the school year. So this is like the broad story that they want to communicate to the board. Thinking about how in that channel that you communicate is where it can vary. And again, being able to communicate this in a brief like add-on to an existing board meeting with a follow-up of sharing it as a one-pager. Really thinking about that, using this as a way to communicate not only to them, but for them to have a consistent message that they can then share out to others. Really, the whole goal is consistent messaging. We don't want it to be that one person heard something, another person heard something, so now there's contradictory information on why this is occurring and what's happening. So being able to provide as many different avenues of communication for them to use to share as well is really important. So I know that we've talked about this in our coaching calls, but really wanting to reflect a little bit more on this. Which stakeholder groups from your district do you think will need the most support during your project launch and why? And then is there any anticipated point of resistance that your district might face?
We can go first. Our stakeholder group that is going to need the most support are our campus leaders and our teachers. I talked about this. We talked about this at one of our previous meetings, but I also talked about this with our teacher researchers because I meet with them for feedback. We actually anticipated not a lot of resistance when it comes to it because they've helped us build and the entire process they've been a part of, our leaders and our teachers. So we do feel like they're going to need support, but we feel like there's not going to be a lot of resistance to it because it is what they have been asking for. And so it's more just about making sure that it aligns with all of our other priorities. And, we work really hard on clearing their plate and, making sure that they have what they need. But we don't see the resistance. We just see that they're going to need support.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And I think that's what we're hoping because of the use of the teacher researcher leads. So having them be so pivotal in phase one and collecting this data and really sharing that with their peers, that we kind of have built such a strong foundation for that buy-in, for that transparency of this is why we're doing that. And Temple, what do you all think?
So I very much agree with her. I mean, that's exactly what we were talking about. I think the campus leaders are going to need the most support because they're the ones pulling the extra items off of the teachers, and they're the ones protecting the PLC. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And our teachers, because it'll be a new structure, they can't just say, oh, I've got this meeting, I can't be there, or I have to attend an art or whatever it is. And then the expectations of actually planning before you get to PLC or internalizing lessons before you get to PLC so that we can have good discussions about it. And I feel like we have some teams that won't need much support. We have some teams, especially at the high school, that are going to need a lot of support. And so I think it'll be very much individualized as to who needs support. And Renata and Amy, if you're on here, you can jump into. But I think our high school will struggle the most. So I think they would need the most support. But it makes sense because they have the most moving pieces too.
Epperson, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do just because our, PLC has, 20, 30 people versus 6 or 7. So it just the logistics of it makes sense. But when you break it down by team, our tested subjects, I feel like will be ready for this change because I think we're doing a lot of pre-stuff, we're internalizing before we get to PLC. So we're making these changes along the way. I think perhaps our non-tested subjects might be where it's at more specifically by then, which is a good place to be in. So that compared to where, we were last year. So, I mean, I think about that, our algebra PLC, I mean, they do that. I mean, you've seen that. So I think it's just the size, but that's fine. Cause when you break it down to a team, it's our content team would be the same as a full team at a middle school. So it does eventually equate to each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, moving a giant ship instead of a little one.
Yeah.
But you don't see any resistance, do you? I don't think any.
No, I think our teachers that are making that shift, it's been really well received because it's more productive during PLC and more things get done. So I don't see any giant resistance.
And Hobbs, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right on with the support, just, helping campus leaders implement that on their campus, especially if it's not something they're already doing. Maybe not the ones that are in this pilot campuses, but maybe just, guidance for them, or just a framework, and then, making sure teachers understand, the, like y'all said, the why are we doing this, to protect their time. And then probably making sure that we're, getting feedback from, the stakeholders that, what we're doing is either it's happening or it's not happening, and why is it not happening, and is it, if it's happening, is it helping? And if it's not, then what can we do to fix it and try to revamp?
Yeah, I'm so happy you mentioned that. And I think just continue to utilize those teacher researchers, knowing that like they're still in that consultant role of they are your boots on the ground, being able to see like, hey, is this happening? What are people saying? What is working well? What isn't? What shifts do we need to make? Really using them as like they are the experts. They are the ones living it, of just continuing to involve them in that process. Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that we're not anticipating much resistance. I know that there's going to be a variance in what stakeholder groups will be more difficult to engage and wrangle just because of size, complexity. But I think being able to share learnings, and I think that's one thing that we will be able to especially cover during the coaching calls in phase 4 of like, hey, this is what like Temple's doing. Why don't you try that? Here's what Lytle is doing. Really using some peer-to-peer learning, I think will be really helpful. And also just we have supported a bunch of different districts in implementing new plans. So we can think about it from a holistic lens of what other kind of techniques could we anticipate trying. So now jumping specifically into project launch. Again, we kind of covered this already during the change communication, but this is just thinking specifically again about that project launch pieces. So the best project launches are simple, transparent, and consistent. They have a clear vision and purpose, so all staff understand why the work matters. It has, again, that consistent messaging. Leaders at all levels can describe the plan and why it's happening. The right people are informed at the right time, making sure that they receive tailored communication, that we have aligned roles and responsibilities. Everyone knows what they're doing and why. And there's also those predictable structures, really thinking about there's performance management routines. So when you're thinking about what to do before launch, all of this, again, has been covered in the implementation plan, but just thinking specifically about as you're preparing to launch. We want to ensure that the implementation plan is complete across all those tabs. You've also briefed leadership in advance and confirm who owns what. So really thinking about it from the lens of district versus campus. This is such a unique process because it has been individualized at the campus level of collecting data, but then we've been looking at it and synthesizing at the district, and it is a district strategy. So really being specific on who owns what from district to campus perspectives. You also want to prepare your communication. So draft all your communications and identify those timelines and channels. This is what we're going to give you a little bit extra time today to look at your current tab 5, your communication plan, to make sure that you have covered this in terms of project launch. So I know we talked a lot about thinking about communication throughout the implementation plan, but how are you communicating out that this is happening? This is why. And then also, again, just confirming your performance management routines. You don't have to have all of your meetings scheduled, but we really want you to have your first one scheduled because we know that first one is the hardest one to get scheduled. Once you get everyone in the room and you're set come January, then you can set your remaining performance management meetings. Again, thinking about the what of performance management and how it aligns with change communication. It's really that continuous process where team members collaborate to set expectations, monitor progress, and provide ongoing feedback. It's not only looking at the outcome data, but it's really looking at, especially with this plan just being implemented, the process piece of is everything that you plan to happen happening? If not, Why is it not? What pivots can we make? So especially during these first couple of months, we really want you to be looking at that process piece and if everything is happening with fidelity, because if it's not, we know we're not going to see those outcomes that we wrote about. So really being able to say, and that's why these teacher researcher leaders are going to be so instrumental, because they're going to be able to say like, hey, we communicated this, but we are still not seeing X, Y, and Z happen. Like, why is that the case? So really being able to look at if everything that you planned is actually occurring. When we think about do's and don'ts for project launch, do want to communicate early and often. So again, it's not just a one-time thing, it's a regular communication, so it stays top of mind, especially when you're thinking about something related to instructional time that overlaps with so many different initiatives. Really being able to think about how you can tie it into other work that your district is doing. Like, hey, I know that we're also implementing this change. This relates in XYZ way. So really being mindful of that. Making the launch simple for staff, showing visible leadership support. That's why it's so important that you have this DQI team in your lead, making sure that it shows you have the buy-in from the top, and this is who's supporting it, and this is who they can go to for questions. Checking in regularly with campuses. That's why we have all of the campus principals on the DQI team lead. Collecting quick feedback, making sure that it's an ongoing process. Feedback is data. I think a lot of times we're intimidated, and when we say we need to collect data, we're like, oh, we need a really abstract process that is collecting it. No, it can just be like, hey, teacher researcher, how's it going? That's data, that's feedback. And then, of course, celebrating early progresses. As you're seeing changes happening, celebrating those, communicating that. When we think about don'ts, you don't want to introduce new initiatives simultaneously. That just becomes an overload. Don't assume everyone reads the materials. That's why it's important we have multiple channels of communication. Emails are great. Not everyone has time to read through all of the details, so being able to share that out verbally. You don't want to overload teachers with information as well. You don't want to wait to address challenges. That's why these performance management routines are so important, because it's not that you're waiting until a quarterly check-in or like a mid-year check-in. You're able to see what's happening in real time. And then you also don't want to let inconsistency creep in. We want to create these consistent routines that are then mirrored to those who are implementing this work. So now we're going to give you some time in breakout rooms to, again, just review your communication plan. We first want you to review tab 8, which is your performance management routine. And as a team, just kind of set your first performance management review date. Say, hey, this is when we're meeting. You don't have to say all your following dates, but just make sure you have your first date set. This is really going to help, especially as you're coming back after the new year. And then spend some time on tab 5 of your implementation plan, ensuring it includes a strong project launch component. So we want to make sure that you're really thinking about how you're communicating to these various stakeholder groups and what you're communicating in terms of, again, why you're implementing this strategy. Before I open up the breakout rooms, does anyone have any questions? All right. So I'm going to open these up in 1 second. All right. Well, hold on, I did it wrong. Okay. Juliana, you're with Lytle, correct? And Matthew Lytle. Got it. There we go.
Why do we live in Wisconsin?
All right. All right. Looks like everyone's back. So again, hopefully that gave you some time to just revisit your communication plan, making sure that you've really thought through that project launch piece. Want to do a quick share out before we wrap up. If the lead or whoever wants to jump in can share the stakeholder groups that you'll communicate the project launch to and the kind of channels that you brainstorm of how you will communicate to them.
Okay, so in Temple, Donna, the assistant superintendent of HR, does an update to the board, and also Renata, Dr. Rogers, the and get her title.
Chief Academic Officer.
The chief academic officer also does an update to the board. So they will handle the communication to the board through their updates. And then at the principal retreat, CNI does an update for the PLC processes with the principals. And then, of course, our teacher research, well, they won't be at every campus, but then the principals will take that back to their campuses. So it seems like everybody's in a good space. There are a few issues, but nothing that anyone feels like they can't handle. Just with maybe having new people or whatever. But we feel pretty good about it. We feel like it's been a good shift or a good focus with something that we're already doing. So it hasn't been a complete change or anything that's going to knock anyone out. It's just been a positive readjustment to what we wanted to happen anyway. So teachers are feeling heard, and we feel like it's going to be fairly smooth. And we'll be doing our check-ins every month, starting in January, and doing walks to check the PLCs and having principals report if teachers are being pulled and things like that. So we'll be starting that in January, but we feel like we're in a good place. Anything else? Okay.
Great. That sounds awesome. And I like that it opens up the two-way communication, because I think it's important to think about communication from the top to bottom, but then also from like teachers, when they have questions, who do they go to? And making sure that there's open lines of communication. So they clearly know, hey, I can go to that teacher researcher lead. I can go to the principal, making sure they know where to go.
I'll go ahead and speak for Lytle briefly. So on the communication plan, I know that one thing that we've discovered that is that a lot of the pieces that are laid out here have just come out organically for us, especially on my campus with my academic coach and with our teachers. Mrs. Lingo can speak to that because she does biweekly, sometimes weekly check-ins with our academic coach. But it's just come up how with the transition to Bluebonnet, the way we were initially meeting to ensure that everybody was where they needed to be, that as we've gotten through the first semester, what we've talked about within this teacher time study is just going to happen naturally, because we've noticed with some of our veteran teachers, they're not nearly needing the supports as far as some of those internalization pieces as some of our newer teachers. So it's come up. But we also don't want to just say, oh, y'all are veteran, y'all can go off on your own. My academic coach is really well at knowing, she goes, everybody needs to grow. So wherever they're at, they still need to grow. So knowing our teachers in that way is super helpful, because she knows where to steer their PLCs and kind of what they need and where they'll need to be at. And with the support of our curriculum instruction director, Miss Lingo, they have really good conversations on where to guide that. And then with the support that we'll have from Engage to Learn, it also steers us in that direction as well. And Mrs. Schott, our AC, is able to have, one-on-one conversations that they hold a standing window for her. And so the things that we're doing also can feed into there with a constant touchback with Engage to Learn, and then with the stakeholders here on our campuses and within our district. So it's good to have it laid out like this, but it was all just kind of flowing into that naturally as well.
That's great to hear. And I'm glad to hear that it, because again, we don't want to reinvent anything. Whatever works best for your district. I think it's just important to be able to have something stamped that everyone agrees to, that they know what's happening. So I'm glad it's kind of like a mix of that.
And it's really good just having it there because it provides that accountability piece for us to always make sure that we go back and say, oh, we did it.
Yeah.
It's there, or just, oh, we forgot a piece of it. So it is helpful to have it there. Definitely.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so I'll add to what Siobhan said, because that is truly what has happened organically. And in our little breakout session today, we realized that, we already have a plan to present to our DEIC. Ms. Lingo had mentioned, we already have Engage to Learn coming in June, so that can be another touch point with our school board. We already have our sessions laid out for training for facilitating PLCs. We already have. So basically, it's just us like saying August PD, okay, we need to get ready for that. Campus launch, we need to get ready for that. So it's helped us to get a little bit more granular in our communication plan and making sure that we do it. I also have been meeting with the teacher researchers, and every single time we meet, then I follow up with the teacher researchers and say, okay, the DQI team did this, or we had this training, and so that, and I hand them the theory of action to make sure that, like, okay, are we actually doing what we said we were going to do? And so that's sort of been helpful to keep us accountable, because then they go back to their campuses and say, no, I met, this is what they're working on, this is what's coming. And so I think that's been helpful too, to hold me accountable to our team as well. And we set our first meeting. We're meeting at the end of January.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Again, it's really just emphasizing that two-way communication of, you want everyone to feel comfortable knowing who they can come to when they have ideas, feedback, insight on how everything is happening in actuality, and being able to leverage those teacher researcher leaders as your perfect point to be able to do that. Awesome. So thinking about what's coming up. Again, we just have our implementation plan that's due December 19th. Just make sure that that is finalized. I know both of yours are already in your district folder. Just kind of put the final stamp, and if you can shoot me an email and just say, hey, our plan's done, then we're good to go on that. January to April will be those monthly coaching calls with, again, only the DQI team leads. And then on May 15th, we're going to put a calendar hold. We want to have a pre-pilot reflection, kind of similar to what we did after the needs assessment, but being able to say, hey, what worked well in phase 2, phase 3, phase 4? What changes can we make as we are rolling out the pilot? Really being able to learn from you guys around what you think worked well and what we could change in terms of the trainings, the coaching, the specific tools, everything. So specifically thinking about your next steps, it sounds like you all are in a really good spot. So it sounds like number 1 can just be checked off, but as a team, reviewing tab 5 in your implementation plan, ensuring that it includes specific actions related to the project launch, and then just finalizing your plan and uploading it to the district drive by December 19th. So you don't have a lot left. Kudos on wrapping up this massive project. It's been so fun seeing all of the, just coming from like the data collected to be able to see your strategies that you want to implement, and now excited to hear how implementation goes. One update on my end, I will not be joining the coaching calls. I am currently pregnant and I'm due January 2nd. So I will be out on maternity leave. I will be at the May end of reflection wrap up. But just want a heads up, I won't be at the coaching calls, but I'm so excited to hear how everything goes, and just have really, really, like, this has been my favorite project, and seeing all of the growth and districts being able to use the data to really identify these, and working with both leadership teams and teacher researchers. It's just been like filling my pot. I love it. I've loved working with all you guys. I'm definitely going to miss it. So, I hope everything goes really great. With the coaching calls, I'll definitely be staying in touch. Otherwise, if you all can just please fill out this exit ticket, that would be great. Again, just showing us that you attended and then just giving us some feedback on how this went. Please feel free to reach out. Again, I'm not due till January 2nd. My first did come a little bit early. So if you get an auto response, then I might be out a little early, but obviously other team members will respond. But please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, clarifications on your implementation plan, or if you just want to jump on a call and talk through anything. We're here to support. I hope everyone has a phenomenal holiday break. You all deserve some rest and peace, and I hope it doesn't get too cold for you.
Bye. Congratulations, Alex.
Congrats. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Merry
Thank you.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Bye.
Happy holidays. Bye.